She fed 3 strange children who showed up every night at her cafe. What she didn't know? Their father, the most powerful vampire in existence, was watching from the shadows. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick comment below and let me know what draws you to vampire stories. Your engagement really helps support this channel. The Whisperlight Cafe wasn't much to look at. Tucked between a closed-down bookshop and a 24-hour laundromat, the small diner sat on the corner of a rain-soaked street where the city forgot to glow. Its amber lights flickered behind fogged windows, casting weak halos against the perpetual drizzle that turned the pavement into a mirror of blurred streetlights and neon signs. But for Melissa John, it was everything. Melissa wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic after years of closing shifts. At 28, she'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of late-night work, the hiss of the espresso machine cooling down, the soft jazz playing through crackling speakers, the occasional rumble of a delivery truck splashing through puddles outside. Business had been slow for months now. The new bistro 3 blocks over, sleek, Instagram-worthy, expensive, had siphoned off most of the neighborhood traffic, leaving small places like Whisperlight struggling to keep the lights on. She sighed and glanced through the rain-streaked window. Beyond the glass, the city stretched into darkness, its taller buildings disappearing into low-hanging clouds. A figure stood across the street, barely visible through the downpour, a tall, pale silhouette beneath a street lamp. Melissa blinked, and when she looked again, he was gone. Trick of the light, she told herself, turning back to stack clean mugs on the shelf. The door chime startled her. Melissa looked up, surprised to see customers at this hour, well past 10 on a Tuesday, when even the regulars had gone home. Her surprise deepened when 3 small figures shuffled through the doorway, rain dripping from their clothes onto the worn linoleum. They weren't like any children she'd seen before. Standing between 3 and 4 feet tall, they moved with an eerie stillness, their silver hair plastered to pale faces that seemed to catch and hold the cafe's amber light. The eldest, a girl Melissa assumed, had her hair pulled back severely, revealing sharp, delicate features and eyes that glimmered faintly, almost luminous in the dim cafe. The second girl, slightly smaller, had softer curls framing a face full of quiet curiosity. The boy, the smallest of the 3, positioned himself slightly in front of his sisters, his gaze sweeping the empty cafe with unnerving awareness. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Their clothes were immaculate despite the rain, dark, old-fashioned layers that looked hand-tailored, with intricate embroidery along the collars. They wore no coats. Their skin looked bloodless, porcelain pale, and when they stepped fully into the light, Melissa noticed they cast shadows that seemed wrong somehow, too long, too dark. Hello, Melissa said, forcing warmth into her voice despite the strange prickle at the back of her neck. Welcome to Whisperlight. Can I help you? The tallest girl stepped forward, her movements precise, almost formal. When she spoke, her voice had the careful cadence of someone translating thoughts from another language. We require sustenance, she said softly. We have currency. She held up a small leather pouch, and Melissa caught the dull gleam of old coins inside. Not modern currency, but something antique, valuable looking. Melissa nodded slowly, trying to hide her confusion. Of course. Are you here alone? Where are your parents? The 3 children exchanged glances, not speaking, but communicating something Melissa couldn't parse. The eldest girl's expression remained neutral. We are unaccompanied this evening, she replied. We were told this establishment serves warm food. It does, Melissa said, her instincts as a waitress overriding her questions. Kids were kids, and these 3 looked hungry and cold, despite showing no visible shivering. Why don't you sit down? I'll make you something good. The children chose the booth by the window, the one where rainwater traced slow paths down the glass. They climbed onto the vinyl seats with careful, deliberate movements, folding their hands on the table in perfect symmetry. The smallest boy kept glancing toward the rain-dark street, as if expecting someone. Melissa pulled out her order pad, though the cafe was empty enough she didn't really need it. Do you have any allergies? Anything you can't eat? Another silent exchange. We are unfamiliar with your cuisine, the eldest said. We require warmth, sustenance. Simple preparations are acceptable. Melissa's brow furrowed. Their phrasing was strange, formal, almost archaic, and their pallor worried her. When was the last time these kids had eaten? Okay, she said gently. How about warm milk with honey, some fresh croissants, and a bowl of soup? Does that sound good? The middle girl's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion Melissa had seen from any of them. That is, acceptable, the eldest said, and something in her tone suggested it was more than acceptable. Melissa returned to the kitchen, her mind racing as she heated milk in a small pot, adding honey and a pinch of cinnamon. She warmed croissants in the oven and ladled butternut squash soup into 3 ceramic bowls. As she worked, she kept glancing through the service window at the children. They sat perfectly still, hands folded, watching the rain with an intensity that made her uneasy. Outside, barely visible through the downpour, that tall figure stood across the street again. This time, Melissa was certain she saw eyes, red eyes, reflecting the cafe's light like an animal's in headlights. She shook her head. Long shift. Tired eyes. When she brought the food to their table, arranging it carefully, the children stared at the meal with something approaching reverence. "Here you go," Melissa said. "Careful. The soup's hot." The eldest girl picked up her spoon with delicate precision, brought it to her lips, and tasted. Her eyes closed briefly, and a soft sound escaped her, almost like a sigh of relief. "Is it okay?" Melissa asked, suddenly anxious. "I can make something else if it is perfect," the girl whispered. "We have not experienced such warmth in some time." The other two began eating as well, their initial caution melting into something that looked like hunger, deep, desperate hunger that made Melissa's chest tighten. "I'm Melissa. By the way," she said, crouching beside their booth, "what are your names?" The eldest set down her spoon carefully. "I am Arya. These are my siblings, Serafina and Adrian." She gestured to each in turn. "It's nice to meet you," Melissa said. "Listen, I don't mean to pry, but it's pretty late, and this isn't exactly a safe neighborhood for kids to be wandering around. Does someone know where you are?" Arya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her luminous eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "Our guardian is occupied," she said carefully. "We were exploring. We will return before our absence is noted." Melissa frowned. Everything about this felt wrong. The formal speech, the strange appearance, the late hour, the evasive answers. But she'd learned long ago that sometimes kids ended up in difficult situations, and pushing too hard only made them run. "Well," she said instead, "you're welcome here anytime you need a warm meal. Okay?" Adrian, the smallest, looked up at her for the first time, his silver eyes wide and solemn. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why what, sweetheart?" "Why do you offer kindness? We are strangers." Melissa felt her throat tighten at the question, at the genuine confusion in his young face, as if kindness were some foreign concept he'd never encountered. "Because you're kids," she said softly, "and kids need kindness more than curiosity." When they finished eating, Arya placed several old coins on the table, far more than the meal cost. Melissa tried to refuse, but the girl insisted with quiet dignity. "The sustenance was satisfactory," Arya said, standing. "We offer gratitude." "You're very welcome," Melissa replied, walking them to the door. "Stay safe out there, okay? The rain's getting worse." She watched them leave, 3 small figures disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Through the window, she thought she saw them pause on the corner, and saw that tall silhouette step from the shadows, moving toward them. The children didn't flee. They approached the figure as if they knew him. Then the rain swallowed them all. Melissa turned back to clear their table, still troubled by the strange encounter. As she picked up the coins, she froze. They weren't modern currency at all. They were old, centuries old, if the dates were real, minted with symbols she didn't recognize, and stamped with a crest, a crown over 3 stars. She looked up sharply, but the street outside was empty. The children were gone. The mysterious figure had vanished, and Melissa John, closing shift waitress at a failing cafe, had absolutely no idea she'd just fed the 3 royal heirs of the Undying Court, or that their father, Elaric Vesper, the vampire king who ruled the night itself, had been watching from the rain. The next evening, just before closing, the door chime rang again. Melissa looked up from wiping down the espresso machine, and her heart did an odd little skip. The 3 children stood in the doorway, rain streaming from their silver hair, their pale faces turned toward her with something that looked almost like hope. "You came back," she said, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. "You offered welcome," Arya replied, as if this explained everything. "We have returned. Well, come in out of the rain." Melissa gestured toward their booth by the window. "Same spot as yesterday?" The children moved to the window booth with that same eerie grace, water pooling beneath their feet on the worn linoleum. Melissa grabbed a bar towel and brought it over, crouching beside the smallest. "Adrian, right?" When he nodded, She gently squeezed water from the ends of his silver hair. "You're going to catch cold walking around in weather like this." His eyes, those strange, luminous eyes, fixed on her face with unnerving intensity. "We do not suffer from cold," he said softly. "But we appreciate the concern." Melissa smiled and moved to the kitchen, her mind already planning their meal. She warmed milk in a pot, adding honey and a generous pinch of nutmeg this time, something her grandmother used to make on winter nights. Fresh croissants went into the oven, and she heated the last of the day's vegetable soup, adding extra herbs. When she returned with the steaming mugs, Adrian reached for his immediately. His small fingers brushed against Melissa's hand, and she nearly dropped the cup. His skin was ice cold. Not chilly, cold, like touching marble in winter, like pressing your palm against a frosted window. No warmth, no pulse of life beneath the surface. Melissa's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she wrapped both of Adrian's hands around the warm ceramic mug, holding them there gently. "There," she murmured. "Let that warm you up, sweetheart." Something rippled through the air, a sound so subtle Melissa almost missed it. A low hum, like a tuning fork struck in a distant room, vibrating through the cups and silverware on the table. The overhead lights flickered, and in the mirror behind the counter, Melissa caught a glimpse of something impossible. A hairline crack in the glass that had been there for months suddenly sealed itself, the fracture disappearing as if it had never existed. She blinked hard. Certain exhaustion was playing tricks on her. "Miss Melissa?" Serafina's voice pulled her attention back. "Is something wrong?" "No," Melissa said quickly, shaking off the strangeness. "Just tired, long day. Let me get your food." She returned with croissants and soup, arranging everything with practiced care. The children ate slowly, savoring each bite with a reverence that made Melissa's chest ache. When was the last time someone had appreciated her cooking like this? The door chimed again. Two of her regulars, a night shift nurse named Carmen and a taxi driver named Joe, shuffled in, shaking rain from their coats. They ordered coffee, casting curious glances toward the children's booth. "Those kids again?" Carmen whispered when Melissa brought their cups. "They were here yesterday too, weren't they?" "Just some customers," Melissa replied, keeping her voice neutral. "They're different," Joe muttered, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Something not right about them. They're just kids," Melissa said firmly, ending the conversation. But she noticed how Carmen and Joe left quickly, their coffee only half finished. 20 minutes later, her manager Ray emerged from the back office, a clipboard in hand and concern etched across his weathered face. "Melissa, we need to talk." He gestured toward the children. "You copied their meal last night." "Can't do that anymore. We're barely breaking even as it is." "I'll pay for it myself," Melissa said quietly. Ray sighed. "It's not about the money. Well, it is, but look, just no more free meals, okay? Not with the way business has been." Melissa nodded, though she had no intention of turning the children away. After Ray retreated to his office, Melissa noticed something odd. When she checked the tip jar an hour later, the old mason jar by the register where customers sometimes left change, it was fuller than it should be. Not just fuller, exact. She counted quickly. Enough to cover both nights of comped meals, plus the utilities bill that had been giving her anxiety all week. She looked toward the window booth. The children sat in silence, watching the rain trace paths down the glass. And beyond them, barely visible through the downpour, that tall figure stood again across the street. This time, Melissa didn't look away. She stared directly at him, at the pale face beneath the hood, at the eyes that glowed faintly red in the darkness, at the regal stillness of his posture. He didn't move, didn't hide, just watched, testing, she realized suddenly. He's testing something. "Time to go," Arya announced, sliding from the booth. Her siblings followed, moving toward the door with reluctance. Melissa walked them to the entrance, holding the door open against the wind. Rain lashed the sidewalk and she grabbed an umbrella from the stand. "Here, take this." "No need," Arya said gently, then paused, her luminous eyes fixed on Melissa's face, and she spoke with sudden formality, her voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. "Warmth freely given shall not be forgotten." The phrase sounded ceremonial, ancient, like words from a ritual Melissa didn't understand. "You're welcome," Melissa replied, uncertain. "Stay safe, okay?" She watched them disappear into the rain, the tall figure moving to meet them. This time she saw him clearly. He knelt before the children, and Adrian reached up to touch his face, a gesture of familiarity, of family. Father, Melissa thought. He's their father. But what kind of father watched from the shadows instead of coming inside? Melissa returned to her closing routine, disturbed but unable to articulate why. She locked up at midnight, stepping into the rain-soaked street, pulling her jacket tight against the cold. The cafe door clicked shut behind her. When Melissa returned at dawn to prep for the morning shift, she froze on the threshold, scratched into the wood of the door. Small, precise, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a symbol she'd never seen before. A crimson sigil, still faintly warm to the touch, etched with something that definitely wasn't a key. It looked like a seal, like a mark, like a claiming. Melissa's hand trembled as she traced the symbol's curves, and somewhere deep in her bones, she felt something awaken, something old and binding, like a contract written in warmth and kindness, signed without her knowing. The keeper's oath had begun. Melissa tried scrubbing the sigil off 3 times before her shift started. It wouldn't budge. The crimson mark seemed etched into the wood itself, as permanent as a brand. She finally gave up and positioned a chalkboard sign over it, advertising the day's soup special, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. The evening shift crawled by with the usual handful of customers, delivery drivers grabbing coffee, a student camping at a corner table with textbooks spread wide. Melissa kept glancing at the clock, wondering if the children would return. They arrived at 9:30, right as the rain started again. This time, they weren't alone. A man entered behind them, tall, slim, dressed in a dark coat that looked expensive despite its austerity. His hair was iron gray, swept back from a high forehead, and his smile was too wide, too fixed, like something he'd learned to wear rather than felt. He chose a table near the children's booth, folding his hands on the table with deliberate precision. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as poured oil. "Black coffee, please. No sugar. Coming right up," Melissa replied, her instincts prickling. She brought the children their usual, warm milk with honey and nutmeg, fresh croissants, soup, and noticed how they'd gone rigid in their seats. Adrian had positioned himself between his sisters and the stranger, his small hands gripping the table edge. The man sipped his coffee, his pale gray eyes never leaving the children. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" he said, addressing them directly. "Rare to see young ones out so late. I'm Pastor Merrick. And you are?" Aria's face remained blank, but Melissa saw her fingers tremble slightly as she reached for her milk. "They're just here for dinner," Melissa interjected smoothly, stepping between the tables. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Marek's smile widened, though his eyes stayed cold. "How kind you are, feeding strays. That's very charitable." The word landed like an insult. "They're customers," Melissa said firmly. "Same as anyone, of course." Marek took another slow sip, though one wonders where their guardians might be. Children shouldn't wander alone after dark. Dangerous things in the shadows these days. The thread in his words was gossamer thin but unmistakable. Melissa felt her jaw tighten. "If you're not ordering food, I'm going to have to ask you to finish your coffee and move along. We're closing soon." Naturally, Marek stood with fluid grace, leaving exact change on the table. As he passed the children's booth, he paused. "Be careful, little ones. Not everyone is as hospitable as this kind woman. Some of us remember the old laws." Then he was gone, the door chiming softly behind him. Melissa exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. The children remained frozen until the sound of his footsteps faded down the street. "Who was that?" Melissa asked quietly, sliding into the booth across from them. "A hunter," Adrian whispered, his voice barely audible. "A hunter of what?" Aria's luminous eyes met hers. "Of us." After the cafe closed, Melissa locked the door and pulled out her laptop at the counter. The children had left quickly tonight, more frightened than she'd ever seen them. And those coins, the antique ones they'd paid with, sat in her apron pocket like small weights. She photographed one and ran a reverse image search. The results made her breath catch. Vesper Dynasty, 1647-1842, Kingdom of the Undying Court. She clicked through academic articles and conspiracy theory blogs, museum archives, and folklore collections. The Vesper crest, a crown over 3 stars, appeared again and again. Historical accounts described them as a noble house that ruled territories across Eastern Europe, vanishing mysteriously in the mid-19th century. Legends claimed they weren't human at all, that they were something older, something that fed on. Melissa closed the laptop abruptly, her heart racing. No, that was ridiculous. But Adrian's cold hands, the way their reflections seemed slightly off in the mirror, the figure watching from the rain with glowing red eyes. The door rattled suddenly, and Melissa jumped. Through the glass, she saw Aria's pale face. "Please," the girl said, her voice muffled. "May we speak with you?" Melissa unlocked the door. All 3 children tumbled inside, more agitated than she'd ever seen them. "We must warn you," Aria said urgently. "There are those who listen for us, who hunt us. The man tonight, he knows what we are. "And what are you?" Melissa asked, though part of her already knew. Serafina looked up with wide, frightened eyes. "We are the reason the second bell of midnight exists. The hour when hunters come." "The second bell?" Melissa repeated, confused. "The hour that doesn't belong to day or night," Adrian explained. "When the veil is thinnest, when we are most vulnerable." Melissa glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. "You need to go home," she said. "Now, where do you live?" "I'll drive you." "We cannot tell you that," Arya said. "But we should not have come tonight. We've placed you in danger." "Then I'm walking you," Melissa said firmly, grabbing her coat and an umbrella. "I'm not letting you go out there alone. Not with that creep lurking around." The children exchanged glances but didn't argue. They stepped into the rain together, Melissa holding the umbrella over the children's heads. The street was empty, slick with water, the lamps casting weak pools of yellow light. Fog had rolled in, thick and unnatural, muffling sound. Melissa heard the footsteps before she saw anything. Multiple sets, moving in rhythm, closing in from different directions. "Keep walking," she whispered. Shadows peeled away from the walls, tall, angular figures that moved wrong, their limbs too long, their movements too fluid. Melissa's breath came in short gasps. The children pressed closer to her, but as they approached the cafe's door, still visible behind them, its amber light cutting through the fog, the shadows hesitated, shrank back, as if something about the building itself repelled them. "Quickly," Arya urged. They ran the last few steps, practically falling through the cafe door. Melissa slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt, her hands shaking. Outside, the shadows gathered at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. Then, slowly, they retreated into the fog. Melissa slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the door, trying to steady her breathing. The children stood in silence, pale and grim. "What the hell is happening?" Melissa whispered. Before anyone could answer, she noticed it, the sigil on the door. It had been re-etched, deeper than before, the lines carved into the wood like a brand. And it was glowing now, pulsing with faint crimson light, radiating heat against her back. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ray, her manager. Found weird marks on the door. Calling police in the morning. Something's not right. The cafe lights flickered once, twice, and somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll midnight. The second bell never finished tolling. Instead, the power died. Not gradually, but all at once, as if something had reached into the building and snuffed out every light simultaneously. The cafe plunged into darkness, the hum of the refrigerator cutting off mid-note, leaving only the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Melissa fumbled for her phone, using its pale glow to navigate to the storage closet. Her hands found the emergency candles Ray kept for health inspections, along with a lighter. She began placing them around the cafe, on tables, the counter, along the windowsills, until warm, flickering light pushed back against the darkness. The children stood exactly where she'd left them, 3 pale statues in the candlelight, their silver hair catching the flames' glow like captured moonlight. "Sit," Melissa said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please." They moved to their usual booth. Melissa grabbed clean bar towels from behind the counter and approached them, kneeling beside Adrian first. Rain had soaked through their clothes, plastering silver hair to their foreheads and necks. "You're drenched," she murmured, gently squeezing water from Adrian's hair. "Hold still." She worked methodically, drying each child with practiced maternal efficiency, the kind of care that came from instinct rather than thought. Serafina closed her eyes as Melissa dabbed water from her face. Arya sat rigid, but Melissa saw her shoulders gradually relax under the simple kindness. "There," Melissa said finally, sitting across from them. "Now, I think it's time you told me the truth. All of it." The candles guttered in a draft that shouldn't exist in a closed cafe. Arya folded her hands on the table, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. "We are Arya, Serafina, and Adrian Vesper, heirs to Alaric Vesper, who is called the Vampire King, ruler of the Undying Court." Melissa's breath caught, but she didn't speak, didn't flee, just listened. "The man you saw tonight, Pastor Marek, leads a faction called the Crimson Vein. They believe our bloodline is corrupt, that our father has grown too merciful." Arya's luminous eyes met Melissa's. "They seek to end the Vesper line. To begin with us. Your father," Melissa said carefully. "The man in the rain. He's been watching you. Testing," Adrian corrected softly. "Testing whether mortals would show kindness or cruelty. Most show cruelty." Serafina leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're the first who's just been kind, without asking questions, without wanting something in return." Melissa felt her throat tighten. She looked at these 3 pale, ancient children, because that's what they were, despite everything, and saw only fear and loneliness. "Sit," she said firmly, standing. "Eat. We think better with warm food." She moved to the kitchen, working by candlelight and muscle memory. Milk into a pot, honey and cinnamon stirred in, heated until steam rose in lazy curls. She found cocoa powder and added it, remembering how Adrian had perked up at the mention of something sweet. When she returned with 3 mugs and a plate of pastries, the children stared at the cocoa as if she'd offered them treasure. "You can drink this?" Melissa asked, suddenly uncertain. "I mean, we're young," Arya explained. "We can consume warm liquids, certain foods. Our bodies still remember life, cocoa especially. Something about the warmth, the sweetness. It comforts us in ways blood cannot. There's an old law," Serafina added shyly. "The Pact of Tables. It says any hearth that feeds the hungry becomes liminal ground, a space between worlds. Most vampires have forgotten it, but Father remembers. Is that why the shadows couldn't reach us?" Melissa asked. "When we were near the cafe?" Arya nodded. "This place is becoming a hall, a sanctuary, because you keep feeding us without fear, without demand. The Keeper's oath is awakening. I don't understand." "You don't need to," Adrian said, wrapping his cold hands around the warm mug. "You just need to be you. That's enough." Outside, the rain intensified, turning from downpour to deluge. Through the candlelit windows, Melissa saw shapes gathering, tall silhouettes forming a ring around the cafe. More than before. Dozens, perhaps. The rain began to sound wrong. No longer water, but something harder, sharper, like needles against glass. "They're here," Arya whispered. The children moved closer together, their small bodies tense. Melissa stood, placing herself between them and the door, her heart hammering but her feet planted firm. The door sensor chimed. That bright, cheerful sound utterly wrong in the moment. But no one entered. Instead, a voice drifted through the rain-lashed window, smooth and cold as winter ice. Marek's voice. "Melissa John," it called, formal and mocking. "You harbor what is not yours to protect. Surrender the Vesper children before the second bell tolls again, and you will be spared. This is mercy I offer once. Only once." The candles flickered wildly. Melissa's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Outside, the silhouettes pressed closer to the glass, and the rain fell like daggers, and somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll again, slow, deliberate, counting down to midnight, to the second bell, to the hour when Melissa would have to choose. Surrender 3 frightened children to monsters in the dark, or stand against forces she couldn't possibly understand. She looked down at Arya, Serafina, and Adrian, at their pale, frightened faces lit by trembling candlelight. "Get behind the counter," Melissa said quietly, "and stay there." The bell tolled a second time. The second bell tolled. The windows fogged instantly, not with condensation, but with something thicker, like frost spreading across glass and fast forward. The crimson sigil on the door blazed to life, its light so bright Melissa had to shield her eyes. The candles guttered and swayed as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. Then the door opened. Marek stepped inside, flanked by 2 figures in dark coats whose faces remained hidden beneath deep hoods. They moved with predatory grace, their footsteps making no sound on the linoleum. Behind the counter, Melissa heard the children's sharp intakes of breath. The few remaining patrons, Carmen the nurse and an elderly man who'd been nursing coffee, shrank back into their booths, eyes wide with primal fear. "Miss John," Marek said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Your time has expired. Step aside." Melissa's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to move, not away from the children, but toward them. She positioned herself between the booth and Marek, her hands gripping a metal serving tray she'd grabbed without thinking. A ridiculous shield against impossible monsters. "They're under my roof," she said, her voice shaking but audible. "They're eating. You can wait." Marek's laugh was soft, pitying. "Brave. Foolish but brave. Do you even comprehend what you're protecting? These are not children, Miss John. They are parasites. Leeches wearing innocent faces. They're kids," Melissa shot back. "And they came here hungry. They came here because..." The windows exploded inward. Not shattered. Exploded. Glass and rain and smoke bursting into the cafe like the wrath of God. Melissa threw herself over the children's booth, shielding them with her body as shards flew past. Wind howled through the space, extinguishing half the candles, and the temperature plummeted so fast Melissa's breath came out in clouds. Through the smoke and rain, a figure stepped across the threshold. He was tall, impossibly tall, his pale hair streaming behind him like silver water, his cloak billowing in wind that seemed to emanate from him alone. Upon his head sat a crown of black iron, its points like thorns, catching the candlelight and throwing shadows across the cafe walls. His eyes glowed garnet red, ancient and terrible, sweeping across the scene with a king's absolute authority. Alaric Vesper, the vampire king. His gaze found Melissa first, crouched over his children, a tray held like a pathetic weapon. Then it moved to Merrick, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. She said. Alaric's voice rolled through the cafe like distant thunder. "They are eating." Merrick went rigid, his hunters taking an involuntary step back. "My lord," Merrick said, recovering with forced smoothness. "We did not expect. You entered a place of hospitality," Alaric continued, his words measured and cold. "While the heirs of my line were at table, you threatened violence against a hostess offering shelter and sustenance. Explain." "This mortal has broken sacred law," Merrick countered, his voice gaining strength. "She feeds royal blood. A human offers sustenance to Vesper heirs without sanction, without understanding. This is blasphemy. This is the Pact of Tables," Alaric interrupted. His red eyes shifted to Melissa. "Is it not?" Melissa straightened slowly, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Behind her, she felt the children pressing against her back, taking shelter in her presence. "I don't know about pacts or laws," she said, her voice hoarse. "They were hungry. That's all I saw. Children who needed food." She met those terrible eyes. "Does it matter what they are?" Silence stretched like a blade between heartbeats. Then something shifted in Alaric's expression, not softening. "Exactly, but something ancient and cold cracking just slightly. To you, it matters not," he said quietly. "To us, it changes everything." He turned back to Marek, and his voice became iron. "I invoke the old law. This house is under my vow. The mortal who feeds my blood without demand becomes keeper of this hall. None may harm her. None may threaten what gathers at her table. This is my decree." "You cannot," Merrick began. "I am king," Alaric said softly, and the words carried such weight that Merrick physically staggered. "I can." Merrick's face twisted with rage, his composure finally cracking. "You've grown soft, Vesper, weak. The court will hear of this. A human keeper? For your own children? You make a mockery of our laws. I remake them," Alaric replied. "As is my right." The children emerged from behind Melissa, moving to stand beside their father. Alaric's hand came to rest on Adrian's silver hair, the gesture startlingly gentle. Merrick took a step back toward the shattered windows, his hunters already retreating into the rain. "This isn't over. The Crimson Vein does not forget. We do not forgive." "Neither," Alaric said. "Do I?" Merrick's smile returned, sharp and poisonous. "Enjoy your sanctuary while it lasts, Miss John. I will return with a writ of ash, legal, binding, recognized by both courts, and I will watch this heretical place burn with you inside it." Then he was gone, dissolving into the rain and fog like smoke. The remaining patrons fled without paying, scrambling out the door into the storm. Melissa stood alone with the vampire king and his children, surrounded by broken glass and guttering candles, her entire body trembling with delayed shock. Alaric turned to face her fully. Up close, he was even more terrifying, beautiful and terrible, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. "You have my gratitude." "Melissa John," he said, his archaic formality making the words feel like a binding contract. "And my protection for what remains of your life. While they sit at your table, no vampire in this realm may touch you." "I don't understand any of this," Melissa whispered. "You don't need to understand," Arya said softly, echoing her brother's words from earlier. "You just need to keep being you." Alaric studied Melissa with those ageless eyes. "The children will return tomorrow night, if you permit it. And he paused. "I will ensure no further disturbance." Then he stepped back through the broken window, his cloak billowing, and vanished into the rain with his children following like pale shadows. Melissa sank to the floor amid the glass and water, her hands shaking, Merrick's final words echoing in her mind. A writ of ash. Whatever that was, it sounded like a death sentence. Melissa didn't sleep that night. She sat at the counter until dawn, surrounded by broken glass and puddles of rain, waiting for Ray to arrive and fire her on the spot. Instead, she heard different footsteps, soft, purposeful, unnaturally synchronized. 3 figures in dark clothes appeared at the shattered windows as the first gray light touched the sky. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her presence. They simply worked. New glass materialized from nowhere, fitting perfectly into frames that should have required custom orders. Tools moved with surgical precision. Within an hour, the windows were restored, not just repaired, but perfected, the glass clearer than it had ever been, without a single scratch or imperfection. One of the figures left a leather purse on the counter before departing. Melissa opened it with trembling fingers and found more of those antique coins, enough to cover the damage 3 times over, plus the month's rent she'd been dreading. By the time Ray arrived at 8, the cafe looked better than it had in years. Even the sign outside, which had flickered intermittently for months, glowed steady and bright. What the hell happened? Ray asked, staring at the pristine windows. Insurance, Melissa lied smoothly. Called an emergency service? Ray looked suspicious but didn't press. He had enough problems without adding more questions. Melissa spent her lunch break drafting rules on a piece of cardstock, her handwriting careful and deliberate. House rules, no harm under this roof. No questions that hurt. Seconds for the small. Warmth freely given, freely received. She taped it beside the door, right next to the glowing crimson sigil that wouldn't fade. It felt important somehow, like naming something gave it power. The children arrived at their usual time that evening, appearing at the window booth as if summoned. But tonight felt different, lighter, despite everything. Serafina carried a small cloth bundle, which she presented to Melissa with shy formality. Inside was a pressed white flower, its petals preserved perfectly, impossibly delicate. "It's from our mother's garden," Serafina whispered. Before. Father says it's the last one. We want you to have it. Melissa's throat tightened. I can't take something so precious. You already have, Arya said simply. Later, while Melissa prepared their meal, she found Serafina drawing on a napkin with a pencil she'd produced from somewhere. When Melissa glanced over, she saw a detailed map of the cafe, but not as it was. This version showed hidden doorways, safe corners, places marked with tiny stars. What's this? Melissa asked. Secret places, Serafina said, in case bad things come again. Now you'll know where to hide. Adrian, meanwhile, was learning to fold napkins at the counter. His small, cold fingers worked carefully, creating elaborate shapes, swans, flowers, and finally, a tiny crown that he placed solemnly on Melissa's head. For the keeper, he announced. Melissa laughed despite everything, despite the fear and confusion and impossibility of it all. For a moment, the cafe felt like it should. Warm, safe, full of simple joy. The bell above the door chimed. A man entered, his coat damp from the perpetual rain, a badge visible on his belt. Detective, Melissa's instincts told her immediately. Evening, he said, tired eyes taking in the cafe. Detective Morrison, got a report about vandalism, disturbance. Your neighbors heard breaking glass last night. Storm damage, Melissa said, wiping down the counter. All fixed now. Morrison's gaze lingered on the children, on their too pale skin and silver hair. Those kids okay? They seem underdressed for the weather. They're fine. Regular customers. Where are their parents? That's not really your business, Melissa said, more sharply than intended. Morrison studied her, and she saw the weariness in his face. A man who'd seen too much strangeness in this city to push too hard on minor mysteries. Right, he said finally. Well, if you need help, real help, you call. Understood. He left his card on the counter and departed. But Melissa saw him pause outside the window, watching the children with troubled eyes before disappearing into the rain. An hour later, Alaric arrived. He didn't burst through windows this time. He simply appeared in the doorway after closing, rain streaming from his cloak, crown absent but authority undiminished. The children immediately went to him, and Melissa watched as he knelt to embrace them. A gesture so human, so paternal, it made her heart ache. May I speak with you? He asked Melissa, his formal tone softening slightly. She led him to the kitchen, away from the children. Up close, without the drama of battle, he looked tired, ancient and tired. You've tested humans before, Melissa said. With your children. How many? 17 cities, Alaric replied quietly. Over the past 5 years. Everywhere we went, mortals either feared them, exploited them, or ignored them entirely. You are the first to simply feed them. Why test at all? Why not just care for them yourself openly? Alaric's garnet eyes met hers. Because civil war is coming to the Undying Court. My rule is challenged by fanatics who believe mercy is weakness. If my children are seen as vulnerable, if I am seen as sentimental, he paused, they will be targeted to hurt me. I needed to know if there was still kindness in the mortal world, if sanctuary could exist. And? You exist, he said simply. That is answer enough. He handed her a small rolled parchment. Rumors are spreading. Other vampires, refugees from the court's purges, are hearing of this place. They call it a safe hunger house, a hall where no vampire may hunt if warmth is freely given. Some will come seeking shelter. Others will come seeking to destroy it. Wonderful, Melissa muttered. You can refuse. Alaric said. "I would not blame you. This is not your war." Melissa looked through the doorway at the 3 children sharing a pastry, their laughter like bells in the quiet cafe. "They're just kids," she said. "Someone has to care." Alaric's expression shifted, something between gratitude and grief. "You remind me why I still believe this world is worth protecting." After he left, Melissa was cleaning up when she heard it. A bell, not the door chime, not the cathedral bells from downtown. This was different, deeper, resonating from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the cups and silverware and the bones of the building itself. One single toll, the 3rd bell. The windows frosted over instantly, and in the ice crystals, a pattern emerged. The Vesper crest, the crown over 3 stars, etched in perfect detail across every pane of glass. The cafe lights brightened without flickering. The air grew warmer, and Melissa felt something settle into place. Like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. The hall had awakened, and somewhere in the rain-dark city, enemies were already planning how to burn it down. The frost pattern on the windows lasted 3 days before Merrick returned. He came at dusk, when the cafe was half full with the evening rush, truckers, nurses between shifts, a musician tuning a guitar in the corner. The children sat at their usual booth, warm milk steaming before them. This time, Merrick wasn't alone. He brought 6 figures in crimson robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods, and something worse, 2 uniformed police officers who looked dazed, confused, their eyes slightly glazed as if walking through a dream, and he carried a scroll. The parchment was ancient, its edges blackened and curling, bound with a seal of red wax pressed with a sigil Melissa didn't recognize. When Merrick unrolled it, the words seemed to writhe on the page, written in language that hurt to look at directly. "Melissa John," Merrick announced, his voice carrying through the cafe with unnatural clarity. "By the authority of the Crimson Vein and the Old Courts, I present a writ of ash. This establishment has been declared a heretical sanctuary, in violation of the covenant of separation. It is to be burned to cleanse the blasphemy." The police officers stepped forward mechanically. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate the premises. There's been a complaint." "A complaint?" Melissa's voice rose. "About what? Serving food? Harboring dangerous individuals," Merrick supplied smoothly. "Minors without proper guardianship. Health code violations. The authorities have been informed." Melissa saw it then, the subtle glamour in the officers' eyes, the way they moved like puppets on strings. Merrick had manipulated them, bent them to his will. "This is my business," Melissa said, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "These are my customers. You have no right." "I have every right," Merrick interrupted, holding up the writ. "This document supersedes human law. It is recognized by both courts, mortal and immortal. The building will burn before dawn." In the booth, Arya began to hum, so softly at first Melissa almost didn't hear it. Then Serafina joined her, their voices weaving together in harmonies that shouldn't be possible, creating a sound that made the air shimmer. A ward, Melissa realized. They were singing protection. Adrian slipped a butter knife from the table, setting into his small hand, holding it like a sword, his jaw set with fierce determination. The cafe door burst open. Alaric strode in, his presence filling the space like a storm contained in human form. He wore no crown tonight, but his authority needed no symbol. The crimson-robed figures instinctively stepped back. "Merrick," Alaric's voice was cold iron. "You test my patience." "I invoke law, not war," Merrick replied, though Melissa heard the tremor beneath his confidence. "I offer you blood duel, as is tradition. Your life against mine. Winner claims the hall. I accept," Alaric said immediately. "No," Melissa shouted, surprising herself. "No duels. No vampires deciding what happens to my cafe." Both immortals turned to stare at her. "This is human property," Melissa continued, her voice shaking but steady. "Human business. You want to burn it? You'll have to do it in front of witnesses. Human witnesses." She grabbed her phone and started texting, her fingers flying across the screen. Messages to Carmen the nurse, to Joe the taxi driver, to Detective Morrison, to every regular who'd ever nursed coffee at her counter. Emergency at Whisperlight. "Need witnesses. Please come now. What are you doing?" Merrick hissed. "Inviting the neighborhood," Melissa said. "If you want spectacle, Merrick, let's give you spectacle. Burn this place in front of a crowd. Let's see how your manipulation holds when dozens of humans are watching." Merrick's face twisted with rage, but Melissa saw the calculation in his eyes. Mass glamour was difficult. Witnesses were dangerous. And human authorities, even manipulated ones, couldn't ignore public violence. Within 15 minutes, people began arriving. Carmen brought 2 other nurses. Joe brought fellow drivers. The musician called friends. Detective Morrison showed up, hand resting on his weapon, eyes sharp and assessing. Melissa moved through the growing crowd, pouring coffee, offering pastries, turning hospitality into armor. With each cup served, each small kindness extended, she felt the cafe grow warmer, stronger. The Vesper crest on the windows glowed brighter. The bell above the door rang once, then twice, by itself, with no one touching it. "This changes nothing," Merrick snarled. But Melissa heard the uncertainty now. "The writ is binding." "Then use it," Alaric challenged. "Burn the hall before these witnesses. Show them what your righteousness looks like." Merrick's smile returned, sharp and poisonous. "As you wish." He held up the writ, and it began to smoke. Not ordinary smoke. This was black, oily, wrong. It crawled across the parchment like living shadow. And when Merrick spoke words in a language that predated human civilization, the smoke began to solidify into flame. This wasn't fire that warmed. This was fire that consumed, specifically designed to burn sanctuaries, to devour places of protection and reduce them to ash and memory. The crowd gasped as the flames took shape, hovering in Marek's palm like a caged beast. Outside, the rain changed. The steady downpour transformed into something sharper, harder, crystalline and cutting. Not rain anymore, but razors falling from the sky, each drop gleaming like broken glass in the streetlights. The writ ignited fully, flames spreading up Merrick's arm without burning him, gathering strength and hunger. "Last chance. Keeper," Merrick said, his voice thick with triumph. "Surrender the Vesper children, and I will spare your hall. Refuse, and watch everything you've built turn to ash." The crowd pressed back against the walls. The children stood, moving closer to Melissa. Alaric's hand went to a weapon Melissa couldn't see, and Melissa, standing in the center of her cafe with a coffee pot in one hand and 40 years of ordinary human kindness in her heart, made her choice. "No," she said simply. Merrick threw the fire. The fire hit the windows and screamed. Not the crackle of ordinary flames, but a sound like metal tearing, like the death cry of something that shouldn't exist. The black fire spread across the glass like oil, seeking entry, hungry for sanctuary to devour. Outside, the Crimson Vein began to chant, 6 voices in perfect unison, words that predated language, calling the fire inward. The razor rain intensified, cutting visibility to mere feet, trapping everyone inside. Inside, Melissa moved, not away from the fire, but toward her kitchen, toward warmth, toward what she knew. "Carmen," she called, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "Help me with the cocoa." "Joe, start the coffee maker. Everyone who can hold a cup, start pouring." "Are you insane?" Someone shouted. "The building's on fire." "The building's under siege," Melissa corrected, pulling out her largest pot. "And hospitality is how we fight back." She didn't understand why she knew this, but she felt it, the same way she'd felt the hall awaken. Every act of service, every kindness fed the sanctuary's strength. The fire consumed fear and hatred. Warmth was its opposite. Arya and Serafina joined her, their small hands moving with preternatural speed, arranging croissants on plates, filling mugs with steaming cocoa. Adrian stood guard by the booth, his butter knife still gripped like a sword, his young face fierce. The black fire found a crack in the window seal and poured through. It crawled along the wall like living shadow, leaving char marks on the paint, filling the cafe with the stench of burning things that should never burn. Hope. Safety. Home. "No," Melissa said. She didn't shout it, didn't scream, just spoke the word clearly, firmly, as she placed a mug of cocoa on the counter. The fire recoiled, not extinguished, but stopped, as if it had hit an invisible wall. Melissa felt something surge through her, the hall responding, recognizing its keeper's command. Then the windows shattered. Alaric and Merrick exploded through the glass in a blur of movement too fast for human eyes to follow. They fought through reflections, appearing in mirrors, in the polished chrome of the espresso machine, in the rain-slicked windows, each surface becoming a battlefield. When they manifested fully, they were terrible to behold. Alaric all pale fury and ancient power, Merrick twisted with fanatic rage, both moving with the deadly grace of apex predators. The crowd screamed and pressed back. Detective Morrison drew his weapon, hands shaking, unsure where to aim. The manipulated officers stood frozen, their glamour breaking under the weight of impossible reality. "Hold the door," Morrison shouted suddenly, making a choice. He grabbed a table and shoved it against the entrance. "Nobody in or out. If this place falls, we all fall together." Citizens responded. Joe and Carmen, the musician and nurses, even the dazed officers, barricading the door against the chanting Crimson Vein outside. The cafe became a fortress. The hall became common ground, and Melissa kept pouring. Cocoa and coffee, tea and warm milk, each cup served with shaking hands and stubborn grace. With every vessel filled, the black fire retreated another inch. The walls brightened. The air grew warmer despite the shattered windows. The fire crawled closer to the children's booth. "No," Melissa said again, louder this time. Golden light veined across the floor from where she stood, thin lines at first, like cracks in porcelain, then growing stronger, brighter. Every meal she'd ever served the children, every small kindness, every moment of warmth freely given, manifested as luminous threads spreading through the cafe. The keeper's oath, fully awakened. The black fire touched the golden light and dissolved, screaming as it went. The crimson-robed figures outside stumbled in their chanting, their ritual breaking apart. Marek roared in fury, breaking away from Alaric. "Impossible! The writ cannot be—" The golden light hit him like a wave. He staggered, smoke rising from his robes where the light touched. The other hunters tried to flee, but the light found them through the broken windows, not burning them, but unmaking them, dissolving the hatred and fanaticism that held them together until nothing remained but ash and the fading echo of their chants. The writ itself caught fire, real fire this time, cleansing and bright, and crumbled to ash in Marek's hands. Marek fell to his knees, his power broken, his followers gone. "Mercy," he gasped, looking up at Alaric with wild eyes. "By the old laws, I claim mercy." Alaric stood over him, terrible and still. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "Rise, go, tell the courts what you witnessed here." "Tell them," Marek lunged, not at Alaric, but at Melissa, a desperate, treacherous strike, claws extending toward her throat with killing speed. He moved fast. Alaric moved faster. The Vampire King's hand caught Marek by the throat mid-lunge, lifting him off the ground with effortless strength. There was no drama, no theatrical speech. Alaric simply closed his fist, and Marek crumbled, not to ash like his followers, but to nothing. Erased so completely it was as if he'd never existed. Silence crashed over the cafe like a physical weight. The golden light faded gradually, leaving only candles and the ordinary amber glow of the overhead lights, which had somehow come back on. The razor rain outside returned to normal water, drumming peacefully against the restored windows. Melissa took one step forward, and her legs gave out. She hit the floor hard, her vision swimming. When she touched her temple, her fingers came away red. At some point during the chaos, flying glass had cut her. She hadn't even felt it. Alaric knelt beside her in an instant, no longer a king but something gentler. "You're injured." "I'm fine," Melissa mumbled, though the cafe was spinning. "You're not." Alaric removed a ring from his finger, heavy silver set with a garnet stone that pulsed with inner light. He pressed it gently to her temple, and warmth flooded through her, knitting torn flesh, stopping the bleeding, pulling her back from the edge of shock. When he drew the ring away, the cut was gone. "You risked everything," Alaric said quietly, his garnet eyes searching her face. "For children not your own. For creatures you barely understand. Why?" "Because someone had to care," Melissa whispered. Alaric closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, something ancient and heavy settled in his expression. "Name your price, Melissa John. The Vesper line owes you more than eternity can repay. What do you ask?" Melissa looked around the cafe, at the frightened humans, at the 3 pale children watching with wide eyes, at the battlefield that had been her sanctuary, at the world she'd accidentally stepped into. "A law," she said hoarsely. "Make a law. No vampire can take blood where warmth is freely given. Not just here, everywhere. Make it real." Alaric stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Done," he said, and the third bell tolled. The third bell's echo faded into silence, but something remained, a resonance that spread outward from the cafe like ripples on water, invisible but undeniable. Alaric stood, helping Melissa to her feet, and turned to face the assembled witnesses, human and confused, frightened and awed. "By my authority as king of the Undying Court," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "I proclaim the table decree. No blood shall be taken where warmth is freely given. Any hearth that offers sustenance without demand becomes sanctuary. Any hall that feeds the hungry without fear shall be honored by my realm." He drew a blade from beneath his cloak, ancient iron that gleamed with its own light, and cut his palm. Blood, dark as wine, dripped onto the cafe floor. Where it fell, symbols blazed briefly before fading into the wood itself. "This oath is bound in my blood," Alaric continued. "It will spread to every court, every house, Every vampire who answers to my name. The age of predation without consequence has ended. Outside, though no one in the cafe could see it, the decree rippled outward through the supernatural world, a wave of binding law that forced ancient creatures to acknowledge, to accept, to obey. In night houses across the city, across continents, vampires felt the oath settle into their bones like chains made of starlight. The undying court had been remade by the kindness of a waitress. 3 weeks later, Whisperlight Cafe looked nothing like it had before. The windows gleamed, still bearing faint traces of the Vesper crest and frost that never quite melted. The sign outside glowed steady and bright, now reading, Whisperlight Cafe, all welcome. Inside, the clientele had changed. Oh, there were still the usual regulars, Carmen and Joe, the musician and his friends, late-night workers seeking coffee and comfort. But now there were others. A pale woman in Victorian dress who ordered her coffee black and never touched the food but paid in antique coins. 2 teenagers with eyes that reflected light strangely, sharing a basket of croissants and whispering in languages that predated English. An elderly man whose shadow didn't quite match his movements, nursing tea and reading a book older than the building. The supernatural world had found its sanctuary. Detective Morrison had become a regular fixture at the counter, no longer investigating but protecting. He'd seen too much that night to pretend the world was simple, but he'd also seen Melissa stand between children and monsters. That earned loyalty. Coffee, black, nothing weird in it, he'd say every night, and Melissa would smile and pour. The Vesper children came every evening at 9:30, as reliable as the rain. Tonight, Alaric came with them. He paused at the threshold. No crown tonight. Just a man in dark clothes with silver hair and tired eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his gloves before entering. A courtesy, Melissa had learned. A gesture of respect to the keeper. Inside, he didn't sit at a table. He stood by the window, watching his children laugh over warm croissants that left crumbs on their formal clothing, their pale faces bright with simple joy. "They're happy here," Melissa said, bringing him a cup of coffee. She knew he wouldn't drink. "You could join them, you know. Sit. Kings don't sit in halls," Alaric replied, but his tone was gentle. "We stand guard. Even kings need rest." He looked at her then, really looked, not as a subject or an asset, but as something he couldn't quite name. "You've changed more than laws, Melissa John. You've reminded us what we lost when we stopped being human. You're still learning," Melissa said. "That's good. Means you're not too old to grow." The corner of his mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. "Impertinent. Honest," she corrected. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the cafe buzz with its strange new life. Finally, Alaric set down the untouched coffee. "I should go. Civil war doesn't pause for sentiment." "Be safe," Melissa said. Then, softer, "Come back." Something flickered in his ancient eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or the echo of feelings he'd thought dead. "Always," he promised. He gathered his children with a gesture, and they left together into the rain. 3 small figures flanking their father like pale stars around a dark moon. Later, after closing, Melissa stood at the window wiping down tables. The rain had returned, turning the street into a mirror of light and shadow. In the reflection, she caught it, a silhouette across the street, tall and crowned, watching, not hiding anymore, just present, a guardian in the darkness. Melissa smiled at the glass. She turned to the door, ready to flip the sign to closed, then paused. Outside, barely visible through the rain, she saw them. A small figure, then 2, hesitant on the corner. Children, or something like children, soaked and shivering, too afraid to approach. Melissa flipped the sign to open instead and unlocked the door. She turned on the espresso machine, started warming milk, pulled fresh croissants from the case. The children would come or they wouldn't, but the light would be on. The door would be open, because someone small might need cocoa, someone forgotten might need kindness, someone hunted might need sanctuary, and Melissa John, 28, tired, ordinary in every way that didn't matter, had accidentally become the woman who'd changed the rules for an immortal realm, who'd turned a failing cafe into a hall that vampires honored and humans trusted, who'd proven that warmth freely given was stronger than any ancient magic. The door chimed. The small figures shuffled inside, pale and nervous. Melissa smiled. "Welcome to Whisperlight," she said, reaching for mugs. "What can I get you?" Outside, the Vampire King watched from the rain, and his expression, had anyone been able to see it, was something between wonder and worship. Inside, Melissa poured cocoa and arranged croissants and folded napkins with practiced grace, humming softly to herself. After all, she had a kingdom to feed. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.